Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night Parashat HaShavua class. We are studying Parashat Lech, Lecha, and what an amazing parasha it is. So much information. Today I want to focus on one character, a character that we don't like to speak about, Yishma-El. But not so much Yishma-El himself, but Yishma-El in the future. We see a pasuk in this week's parasha that at first glance, and in reality, truthfully, is a blessing for Yishmael. It's a prayer by none other than his father, Avraham Avinu, concerning his son Yishmael. And I'm going to read for you the pasuk right now. The pasuk says, Vayomer Avraham el Elokim. Avraham tells God, Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. Oh, that Yishmael might live before you. This is, the rabbis tell us, is a prayer for Avraham Avinu for Yishmael. First of all, what is the purpose of this prayer? What was Avraham Avinu thinking? Undoubtedly, there's no way around it. He knew who Yishmael was going to be. He knew that he was not going to follow his footsteps. He knew he was not going to observe the mitzvot of the Torah like his other son Yitzchak was going to do. He knew that Yishmael's descendants were going to cause Bnei Israel much grief and hardship in the future. In fact, the Zohar teaches us that when the Navi Yishayahu writes, Ki Avraham lo yida'anu, though Avraham may not know us, they're wondering that they don't understand, they can't fathom why Avraham Avinu offered this prayer on behalf of Yishmael. To further our issue that we have, surprisingly, many great Torah scholars and Jewish spiritual leaders were named Yishmael. For instance, we have Rabbi Yishmael, who was Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol. There's the Tana Rabbi Yishmael, which is the Braita that we say every morning during Korbanot prior to Pesukei de Zimra. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, HaTorah Nidreshet, 13 ways. So that we see there's a Yishmael who's even a Tana. The entire Talmud is replete with teachings and statements taught by members of the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, the members of the Academy of Rabbi Yishmael. What's going on here? This practice of naming a child Yishmael seems to be at odds with what Shlomo HaMelech teaches us in Mishlei. He says famously, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, V'Shem Reshaim Yirkav. Remembrance of the Tzadik brings you blessing, but the name of the Reshaim will rot. So what does the Gemara ask? Mai V'Shem Reshaim Yirkav. What is the meaning of the name of the wicked will rot? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rikvivot ta'ale bishmotan delo maskinan b'shemayu. Rust should grow on their names, meaning that we don't use their names. When you don't use something for a long time, it rusts. So we don't use the names of the Reshaim. And Rashi says a person should not give the name to his son of a wicked person. And we know Yishmael was a Rasha. This week's Perasha, Vatere Sarah ben Agar HaMitzri asher yada Avraham metzachek. Sorry, next week's Perasha, that Sarah saw that the son of Agar, the Egyptian, who was born to Avraham, Vatome le Avraham garesh ha'ama azot ve'et bena. You have to get rid of this child. Ki lo yirash ben ha'ama azot im benim Yitzchak. This son of a slave woman is not going to inherit with my son Yitzchak. So Rashi says that what did Yishmael do wrong? He was engaged in idolatry. He was engaged in sexual immorality. He was engaged in murder. And that being the case, how were all these tzaddikim and tanaim and Kohen Gadol, Torah luminaries, given the name of Yishmael, who was a Rasha? And again, to give more credence to our question, what beracha is Avraham Avinu giving to Yishmael? So to answer the second question of how do you give a name to your son that is Yishmael, the Tosafot in Masechet Yomah gives an answer based on what happened at the end of Avraham Avinu's life. When Avraham died and he was ready to be buried, the pasuk states, "Vayikperu oto Yitzchak veYishmael banav el me'arat haMachpelah," that Yitzchak and Yishmael buried him in Me'arat HaMachpelah. And here Rashi comments and notices that Yishmael, although he was the older son, is mentioned second, behind Yitzchak. And the reason is because Yishmael let Yitzchak walk ahead of him out of respect, and this indicated that he performed teshuvah. Seeing that he performed teshuvah, it's permissible to name your children after him. So that's how one answer brought down in Tosafot. But there's another Tosafot that says that argues with this and says that no, this answer is not good enough. Not satisfied with this. Why? There's a concept brought down in a different Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin that says Bera mezake Abba, Abba lo mezake Bera. A son, a righteous son, can earn merit for a father who's wicked to save him from Gehinnom, but a righteous father cannot earn merit for a wicked son. En Avraham matzil et Yishmael, en Yitzchak matzil et Esav. Avraham cannot save Yishmael, and Yitzchak cannot save Esav. So this Gemara clearly implies that Yishmael did not perform teshuvah. So again, the question is, if that's so, how do all these righteous people name their sons Yishmael? So they give another solution in the name of Rabbi Elhanan. And Rabbi Elhanan says that the name Yishmael was given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And therefore, because that was the case, it's permitted and appropriate to use his name. Let's explain. The Pasuk says in this week's parasha, Vayomer la malach Hashem, the angel of God told Hagar, Hina chara v'yolat ben, behold, you will conceive and give birth to a son, v'karat shemo Yishmael, and you're going to call him Yishmael, ki shama Adonai el onyech, because Hashem heard your prayer. So we see this indicates that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the one who named him Yishmael. Since the name came directly from God, even though he ultimately became a Rasha, it's permissible to give children this name. But we need to explain this further. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu determined that this boy be named Yishmael, he still turned out to be a bona fide Rasha. Many Rashaim descended from him. Many individuals tormented and murdered Jewish people. So it's still very surprising that prominent Jews would choose to name their righteous children Yishmael. And secondly, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu see fit to name him Yishmael, even though he would not be counted as the Zera of Avraham, as the offspring of Avraham? We know the Pasuk tells us, Ki be'Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. It's through Yitzchak exclusively that the offspring will be considered yours, not Yishmael. So, we have a puzzling matter over here that we need to solve, and that's the purpose of tonight's class. So I read a very, very nice novel interpretation. I'm going to do my best to explain it, because it will touch upon some ideas in our Torah that you may not be used to. The rabbis, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to Avraham Avinu's tefillah. Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. When Avraham Avinu tells God this prayer, that Yishmael might live before you, what does God say? So I read for you the passage. Vayomer Elokim. God said, Aval Sarai Shecha Yoled Lecha Ben. Indeed, your wife is going to bear you a son. Vekarat et Shemo Yitzchak, and you're going to call him Yitzchak. Va'akimoti et beriti ito livrit olam zaro acharav. And I'm going to establish my covenant with him, an everlasting berit, for his offspring after him. Ulishmael shematicha. But regarding Yishmael, I have heard you. I've heard your prayer. Hine berachti oto. I have blessed him. Veifreti oto. Veirbeti oto bimod meod. And I will make him fruitful. And will increase him. Shne masar nesim yolid untativ legoy gadol. He will beget 12 princes. And I will make him into a great nation. And then again, he goes back to Yitzchak. Ve'et beriti akim et Yitzchak. But I will establish my covenant with Yitzchak, whom Sarah will bear to you at this time next year. In his commentary, Rashi asked the following question. Why does it say again, but I will establish my covenant with Yitzchak? Earlier, he already said, Vakimoti beriti ito. one pasuk before that. I'm going to establish my covenant with him. So why does he repeat this promise again at the end of the narrative? So Rashi has a chidush that he brings down from the Midrash. And he says, from here, we learn a kal vachomer. Kal vachomer, a fortiori. I hope I pronounced that right. A kal vachomer is when you learn something from something else that is obvious. So if I say, if it's cold outside in November, kal vachomer, all the more so, it will be cold outside in January. That's a kal vachomer. Rabbi Abbas said from the Midrash, from here we learn a kal vachomer regarding the son of the mistress, the wife, that's Sarah, from the son of the maidservant, Hagar. Because the pasuk says about Yishmael, the son of the maidservant, Hine berachti oto veifreti oto veirbeti oto. I have blessed him and I will make him fruitful and I will increase him. This relates to Yishmael. How much more so, kal vachomer, will I uphold my covenant through Yitzchak? So the reason why God repeated the idea that Yitzchak is going to carry on the covenant is a kal vachomer. If I'm blessing Yishmael to be fruitful and to increase and to give him many, many good things, kal vachomer, I'm going to give it to Yitzchak. But this answer also requires some explanation. After all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu already promised Avraham that he would uphold that covenant with Yitzchak and his offspring. So why is the kal vachomer necessary? He already told me that he's going to do it. Not necessary to bring the kal vachomer. What did it add? To which the answer, we can say, is that it is necessary. It's necessary for the generations and the times that the Jewish people are not worthy. When they're not worthy of a salvation, when they're not worthy of a beracha. Even then, the Jewish people will be exonerated and will be blessed due to the kal vachomer. Even though you're not worthy. But if I'm blessing Yishmael, if I'm giving him good, the kal vachomer I'm going to give the Jewish people. The angel of Hashem told Hagar, Hinae hara yora be'yarat ben. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you shall name him Yishmael, ki shama Hashem el onyech, because Hashem heard your prayer. Since Hashem had already heard her desperate plea, the malach should have instructed her to name her son Yishmael. Yishmael is in the past. God heard your prayer, your plea. So why did he instruct her to name him Yishmael? Yishma is the future tense. God will hear. So the answer to this question is based on the incredible teachings of Rav Dov Ber of Mezrich. He when Moshe Rabbeinu realized that his sister Miriam was stricken with sarat as a result of her lashon hara, he prays for her. And when Moshe prays to cure Miriam of sarat, the pasuk says, "Vayitzak Moshe el Hashem lemor." Moshe screams out to Hashem in tefillah, and he says, "El na refa na la." Please, God, heal her now. And the name for Hashem he uses is El, Aleph Lamed. What does God respond to that prayer? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem tells Moshe, "Ve'avia yarok yarak befanea, halo tikalem shivat yamim, tisager shivat yamim michutz hamachane ve'achar te'asef." God said to Moshe, were her father to spit in her face, if Miriam's father was to spit in her face, would she not be humiliated for 7 days? Kal vachomer, let her quarantine now outside for 7 days, outside the camp, and then she may be brought in. And that was her punishment. And Rashi says, if her father was to show her an angry face, would she not be humiliated for 7 days? All the more so, kal vachomer, the Shekhinah, when you sin against God. So you go outside, and you wait, and you quarantine for 7 days. And Rav Dov Ber of Mezrich explains, in his unique, sacred way, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here in the case of Moshe and Miriam, also employed the kal vachomer. he explains that there are 13 midot of rachamim. When we say Hashem, Hashem, El, Rachum, Vechanun, Erech, Apayim, Verav Chesed, Ve'emet. We know we say it every morning when during our Tachanun, many times in Yom Kippur. These 13 attributes of mercy correspond to the Shlosh Esrei Midot HaTorah Midreshet, the 13 principles on how to expound the Torah that are recited every morning in Korbanot. And therefore, when one of these principles of Torah expounding is employed, it triggers the corresponding attribute of mercy. So now, according to the Arizal, when we say Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun, the Hashem, Hashem is not part of the 13 attributes of mercy. The first attribute of mercy is El. El. When we say El Rachum V'Chanun, El is the first attribute of mercy, which corresponds to the first principle of expounding Torah, Bishlosh Esrei Midot HaTorah Nidreshet, which is Kal Vachomer, the fortiori. This explains why Moshe Rabbeinu specifically, when he prayed on behalf of Miriam, used the name Aleph Lamed, used the name El Na Refa Nala, because he intended to invoke the power of El to heal Miriam. Hence, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hinted to him that this name can only be invoked by expounding a Kal Vachomer. What's a Kal Vachomer? If her father was to spit in her face, would she not be humiliated for 7 days? All the more so by the Shekhinah. And by means of that Kal Vachomer, the name El was summoned to heal Miriam. Beautiful chidush. With this understanding, let's connect it back to our discussion. Why did the Malach instruct Hagar to name her son Yishma-El in the future tense? And the reason is, whenever Bnei Israel would require Hashem's salvation in the future, even if they were to be proven unworthy and undeserving, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would still listen to their prayers. He would listen to their tefillot and please in the merit of this Kal Vachomer. This is especially true since a Kal Vachomer invokes the name of Aleph Lamed, the name of El, the first of the 13 Midot Rachamim. And by the way, some even say that the Midah of El encompasses all 13 Midot Rachamim. So therefore, when you employ the Kal Vachomer to summon the name of El, we trigger all 13 Midot. The question remains, however, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu hint the Kal Vachomer that the son of the mistress, the son of Sarah, will be blessed more than the son of the maidservant to Avraham, specifically after the birth of Yitzchak? Why did he do this after the birth of Yitzchak? And the answer is because he relies on the fact that Avraham Avinu served Hashem differently than Yitzchak would have served Hashem. Avraham served God with the midah of chesed. And as a result, the people of the world living at that time enjoyed a divine kindness, a divine mercy and favor. As a result, Yitzchak Avinu served Hashem with the midah of gevurah, upachad Yitzchak, fear, trembling, the fear of Yitzchak. And as a result, the people living at the time who committed averot were subjected to divine judgment, to divine severity, dinim, gvurot. Therefore, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges Bnei Israel with Abraham's midah of chesed, it's easy to find some sort of merit on their behalf, above and beyond the usual limits of din. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges the Jewish people with Yitzchak's midah of din, there's a big concern that exists that they're not going to be able to find any merit. They're going to be judged guilty. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu initially announces to Avraham, Aval Sarah ishtecha yolelet lecha ben vekarat et shemo Yitzchak. But Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a boy and you will call him Yitzchak. He is informing him that Sarah, who is going to give birth to a son, Yitzchak, whose midah is din, whose midah is judgment. Then, and only then, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu inform him and promise him "Va'akimoti et beriti ito livrit olam nezaro acharav," that he will uphold his covenant as an everlasting covenant, as a brit olam, specifically with Yitzchak and his offspring, even if they're unworthy. This promise made Avraham worry. There was still cause for concern. As a man of chesed, he feared Avraham Avinu. He feared that God might judge Bnei Israel stringently because Yitzchak was midav din. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu announced to Avraham, Aval, regarding Yishmael, Yishmael shematicha. But don't, Avraham, I heard you about Yishmael. Ve'ineh berachti oto, and I blessed him. Because since I blessed the son of the maidservant, since I blessed Yishmael, Kal vachomer, I'm going to bless the son of the wife, of the mistress of the house, Yitzchak. He's going to be blessed even greater degree. And this is the implication of the repeated promise to uphold that brit with Yitzchak. Ver beriti akim et Yitzchak. Since the Kal vachomer invokes the name Aleph Lamed El, which we said is the source of all mercy and rachamim, the offspring of Yitzchak, the children of Yitzchak will be vindicated due to the midah of divine mercy. This is why, on a side point, we are taught in the Gemara, en onshin miladin, that we don't administer the death penalty or lashes, any type of punishment, for a prohibition that's not explicitly mentioned in the Torah, but is just deduced from a kal vachomer. If there's a law deduced from a fortiori, from a kal vachomer argument, and a person transgresses that law, he will not receive a death penalty, if that's the case, or lashes. Because a kal vachomer embedded in it is mercy, is aleph lamed. It's not associated with severe punishment. And now we can explain maybe why several of the Tanaim chose to name their righteous scholarly children Yishmael. The Gemara says, Mena lan deshema garim. Gemara Masechet Brachot. Where do we know that a person's name influences future occurrences? Amar Rabbi Elazar, de Amar Kra lechu chazu mifalot Hashem asher sham shamot ba'aretz atikre shamot el hashemot. Rabbi Elazar says, quoting a pasuk in Tehillim, go and see the works of God who has wrought devastations in the land. Don't pronounce the word shamot, but rather shemot. And based on this concept, we can say that these Tanaim perceived via Ruach HaKodesh of some sort, divine inspiration, that the neshamot of their sons were intimately related to the name of Yishmael. Not the Yishmael the Rasha, who was Rasha throughout his life and it caused horrible things for the Jewish people and murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews over history. Not that Yishmael. But to the Yishmael, the name that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose for the son of Avraham. We learned that the name Yishmael, connotes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hear and uphold the Kal Vachomer. The Kal Vachomer of, if I'm going to bless Yishmael, the son of the maidservant, I'm going to bless the son of the wife. Why? In order to invoke the name of El, that encompasses all the 13 Midot Rachamim. And that's the reason why they named their son Yishmael, recognizing that they possessed a special power and ability to summon this divine mercy, which is associated with the name El in their own name. It's fascinating that we begin our Shacharit prayer every morning with that Braita. Yishmael Omer Bishlosh Esrei Midot HaTorah Nidreshet. The Torah is elucidated through the 13 principles, and the first one is Kal Vachomer. Truth is, there are many opinions actually on how many there are. Rabbi Yishmael says there's 13. In Avot Rabbi Natan, he writes there's only 7. The Harav Chida in Kisei Rachamim says, he brings an opinion that there's 32 principles to interpret the Torah. What do we see? If it wasn't for Rabbi Yishmael in that Braita, who teaches that there are 13 principles, we wouldn't know that the principle of Kal Vachomer, the first midah, aligns with the name El, goes hand in hand with the name of Rachamim, the name of mercy. And if we didn't know that, then we wouldn't understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu named the son of the maidservant, the son of Agar, Yishmael. It's precisely for that reason that Rabbi Yishmael was given that name. It was his designated portion of the Torah to reveal that matter. Because of Rabbi Yishmael, we recognize that a Kal Vachomer possesses the same unique power as El because they line up one in one. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, at first glance, we're amazed. How can a Torah scholar be named after such a Rasha? But that's what the Braita continues. HaTorah nidreshet mikal vachomer megezra shava. He taught us that a kal vachomer corresponds to the name El, and therefore it was fitting that he's named Yishmael, which can be read Yishma-El, because in his merit, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will exonerate the Jewish people and bless them in keeping with his promise, with his kal vachomer, as we explained above. We find another place where this Tana Rabbi Yishmael reveals a connection with the 13 midot of mercy, the 13 midot rachamim. The Gemara in Masechet Nedarim 31a says, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Gedola Mila shenichretu alea 13 beritot. Rabbi Yishmael says that the mitzvah of Milah is so great that it was established with 13 covenants. And Tosafot explain that this statement is founded on the fact that there are 13 mentions of the word Berit, covenant, in Parashat Lech Lecha, in association with the mitzvah Brit Milah. When you go to Aliyah Shevai, you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Avraham to have a Brit Milah, about the Brit Milah, you see the word Berit 13 times. Our rabbis explain that Brit Keruta li-13 midot she'enan chozrot rekam. A covenant was established regarding the 13 midot that they never return empty-handed. What does that mean? In other words, in the merit of fulfilling the mitzvah of Brit Milah, the 13 midot of Rachamim are aroused. So maybe we can suggest the following. Why this statement was specifically revealed by Rabbi Yishmael? Because Milah is so great that it was established by the 13 covenants. We know that Yishmael was also circumcised, Yishmael the son of Avraham, and the Tana Rabbi Yishmael merited extracting the nitzotz, the holy spark that was concealed in the name Yishmael, alluded in the name Yishma-El, God will listen, and therefore he had the privilege, he was the one, this Tana Rabbi Yishmael, of revealing that the Brit of Yitzchak and his offspring, the covenant of God's promise to Yitzchak and his children, possessed a unique kedusha to elicit these 13 midot of rachamim, these 13 attributes of mercy. And this is in contrast to Yishmael and his offspring, Abraham's son Yishmael and offspring, who do not possess his power, even though that they themselves have a Brit Milah, even though that the Islamic world do have a Brit Milah performed on them, but they do not have that power. Who was another person named Yishmael? Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. He was the Kohen Gadol. He was also, unfortunately, one of the 10 martyrs who had to give up their lives at the time of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva was another one, as we know. He also has an association with the 13 Midot Rachamim. Interesting Gemara in Masechet Brachot that says, Amar Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the Kohen Gadol, said, Pam achat nichnasti leaktir ketoret lifnai velifnim. One time I entered the Kodesh HaKodashim on Yom Kippur to perform the ketoret, the holy ketoret. Ve'amar li, ve'ra'iti achratiel ya Hashem tzevaot shu yoshev hakiseh ram v'nisa, and he merited seeing the angel of God, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, sitting on this high, lofty throne with some sort of vision in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Ve'amar li, and God told him, Yishmael beni barecheni, Yishmael, my son, bless me. God's asking Yishmael for a blessing. Amarti lo, so I told him, Yehi ratzon milefanecha, may it be your will, sheichbeshu rachamecha ad kaasecha, that your mercy shall conquer your anger, ve'igolu rachamecha al midotecha, and your mercy be revealed through your midot, your character trait. ותתנהג עם בניך במידת הרחמים, and you act with your children with the midah of mercy, ותיכנס להם לפנים משורת הדין. ונענה לי בראשו. And when God heard this blessing that I gave, he nodded his head. This is also this blessing we also recite during Korbanot in the morning during the weekdays. What was Yishmael Kohen Gadol, Yishmael ben Elisha, hinting over here? Since his name was Yishmael, he possessed this power of Yishma-El, the ability to arouse the 13 Midot Rachamim, which was encompassed in his name El. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Yishmael, bless me. Yishmael, my son, I need a beracha. God doesn't need a beracha. He said this to arouse the divine mercy from the Midot Rachamim on behalf of Israel. It's Yom Kippur. The Jewish people need Rachamim. You're in the Kodesh HaKodashim. You're giving the Ketoret. I need you to use your name to arouse the mercy, to arouse the Rachamim. And so, he gave him the blessing. May it be your will, that your mercy overcome your stricter midot. He was referring to the 13 midot Rachamim. And maybe now, with all this, we can understand Avraham Avinu's prayer that we started the class with. His prayer to God about Yishmael, his son. Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. Oh, that Yishmael might live before you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Upon seeing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent an angel instructing Hagar to name her son Yishmael, Avraham was able to deduce that this name is very propitious, that it contains a holy spark of providing Bnei Israel with salvation. And recognizing that that salvation for the Jewish people would not come from Yishmael himself, Avraham Avinu had to do something. He had to pray. And he prayed to God and said, Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. Oh, that Yishmael might live before you. Meaning what? That the name Yishmael would be a harbinger of salvation. That the Jew would come along and extract the holy spark that is associated with the name Yishmael. And when God heard that tefillah, when God heard that prayer, he responded, Aval Sarah ishtecha yoled lecha ben vekarat et shemo Yitzchak. Indeed, your wife Sarah is also going to bear a son, and your name Yitzchak. V'akimoti briti ito librit olam lezaro acharav. And I will fulfill my covenant with him, a brit olam, an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. You, Avraham Avinu, you're going to contend that Yitzchak's midah is din. And you're going to be worried that the Jewish people are held up in the midah of gevurah, strict judgment, that they're going to be proved undeserving. They're going to be found guilty. So God immediately tells Avraham, Urishmael shematicha. But regarding your prayer of Yishmael, I've heard you. And that's why I blessed him. And that's why I've made him fruitful. And that's why I've increased him exceedingly. And he's going to get 12 princes. I'm going to make him to a great nation. But don't forget the Kal Vachomer. Don't forget, I'm going to establish my covenant through Yitzchak, whom Sarah will bear to you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu committed to uphold this covenant, even if Yitzchak and his offspring are unworthy of being protected. How? By extending the 13 Midot Rachamim to them. Because this divine mercy was the product of the Kal Vachomer, invoking the name Aleph Lamed, the name El, which was applied, the son of the wife, the son of Sarah, from the son of the maidservant, the son of Hagar. And therefore Avraham Avinu understood why HaKadosh Baruch Hu named his son Yishmael, which contains the name Yishma-El. And that's why Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha, he was satisfied. After all, it was specifically Rabbi Yishmael who said, B'shel shlosh eseh midot haTorah nidreshet, that the Torah was expounded with 13 principles. And the first one, a Kal Vachomer, which aligns with the first attribute of the divine mercy, El. Parashat Lech Lecha has many, many profound messages in it. The story of Yishmael is discussed and contemplated by scholars throughout the generations. This is just one idea that I felt I wanted to share with you. So much has been said, so much has been thought of. We always think, but Yishmael was Avraham Avinu's son. How did he turn out to be so evil? Well, there's answers to that, maybe for another time. But one thing we've established this evening. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the one that named Yishmael that name. Yishma-El, for one purpose and one purpose only. To bring mercy to the Jewish people. To allow the Jewish people to be saved, to provide them salvation, even during times that they're not worthy. And as much as we look around and we feel that the Yishmael are doing anything but that, just remember, who was the one that gave that name? Lu Yishmael Yichye Lefanecha was Avraham Avinu's prayer. And the prayer invoked that Kal Vachomer, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will keep the Brit of Yitzchak everlasting, a Brit Olam. And Bezrat Hashem will be Zocheh to eliminate all of the enemies of the Jewish people, so that we'll be Zocheh to merit to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring the Mashiach Tzidkenu. We'll celebrate with our Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Shevatim, all Klal Yisrael Beyachad, celebrating wonderful, wonderful things. Beracha, Shelema, Hatzlacha, B'Yeshua, B'Mira B'Yameinu. Have a wonderful night.